This is our thesis, and the reason we keep on talking about running pilot projects rather than saying we want to implement it is we want to test that thesis. And we want to do that in the difficult areas in Kandahar and Helmand rather than running pilot projects in one of the other provinces. What we're trying to do is find what already exists from the point of view of governance and social mechanisms and use them both from a counter-narcotics point of view, but as I said, to move the central government closer to the rural areas and to move the international presence closer to them. So at the moment, they're business partners of the Taliban, whether they like it or not. And for the moment, they don't have, we believe, functional alternative livelihoods. So what they know how to do is grow poppy, and they're very good at that. So we want to move into that space and say, we're your new business partners. Yep. You're going to be part of a legal economy. You won't have the police coming after you. And this will be part of a future that they can see that they would have with a functioning federal government in Kabul, which at the moment I don't think they see the usefulness of the Kabul government in their lives.
And to the very specific question of where the front money comes from.
It would be a simple microcredit program. And at the moment, of course, we also see in the counter-narcotics package, you've got the funds that used to be used for forced poppy crop eradication. You could use them to kickstart the business model for poppy for medicine. The modeling we're looking at from India and Turkey suggests that there is a functioning business model after you did the startup. But once again, that's another thing we want to test in the pilot project is what are the upfront costs, the costs involved in making the morphine tablets, moving them to Kabul, et cetera.
And Mr. Braun, let me ask you two questions. When I first went over to Afghanistan, the line from the military was, we don't do counter-narcotics. We're not interested, that's not our thing. Later on, it sort of morphed to, well, we're interested because now we've seen the connection, but we can't do it because we have a different authority. And by the way, it backfires and it's complicated and people get angry and we haven't figured it out. So I've never had a very good feeling about the extent to which we had really thought through where we were and how this problem fit into the picture and what we needed to do about it. Is it your sense that we've reached a state of competency in evaluating this problem and responding to it in an effective way in terms of the way the different authorities are spread between law enforcement and NGOs and our military presence and Afghan government? Or is that still pretty awkward?
Well, it's a great question, Senator, and I would simply say that, you know, DOD has turned that aircraft carrier into the wind and they're launching. Look, I lived through this as the Chief of Operations for DEA for 4 years and the Acting Chief of Intel for a year. What we did was we worked very, very hard over that 5 years, and the agency continues to do so, in educating our military on the nexus between drugs and terrorism. I guess my question is, do you now consider them educated? We educated some folks, Senator, but the bottom line is we saw a sea change with General McKiernan when he took over in Afghanistan. I know you know him well, and his successor, General McChrystal, has not skipped a beat. What was woefully absent just as recently as 18 months to a couple of years ago with respect to support from our military has completely changed. These operations that I was explaining earlier, typically you've got armed Predator aircraft overhead as well as AH-64 Apache gunships that are providing airborne force protection. They've got ISR platforms overhead collecting everything in the areas of the operation for additional force protection. They've got medevac standby. They've got ground-based force protection that are ready to roll in, quick reaction teams. I mean, I could go on and on. It is really turned into just a very, very close working relationship between the DEA and between our military. And I will say this, Senator, that
we've gone from not doing it at all to doing it with great technical capability, and the next step is we need to exercise that technical capability in ways that doesn't turn the population against us and provide support for the Taliban.
Yes, sir. And you have to understand that when I'm talking about DEA, I'm not talking about eradication. That is it's non-existent at this point for the most part.
You're talking about upstream, hitting the
organizational attack strategy that's, that's worked well in Colombia and Peru and Thailand and many places around the world. It's the same strategy that we've got applied in Afghanistan. At any given time, 15 to 20 major HVTs that are targeted. And by the way, nowadays, virtually every one of these folks are either Taliban members or closely affiliated with the Taliban.
Final question, and each of you would be free to answer it. I grew up during the time of the conflict in Southeast Asia and had some exposure to the various crop replacement strategies when narcotics were a big issue in Southeast Asia. And what we found was that almost any time we went in to try to get involved in a market in the way that poppies for medicine might do, all that did was encourage expanded production because it added a market to an existing market. And one of the factors that made that possible was the fact that this was a geographically lush area in which security was really the only limiting factor for the growth of the poppy. And so if you had to plant 2-3 times as much, you could plant 2-3 times as much, and there was no real limit to that. Just from flying around in southern Afghanistan, I mean, it looks like the moon. You couldn't plant a thing there except in these narrow ribbons along the edges of the rivers. And it just, that gives me the very uneducated sense that this is a slightly different situation than Southeast Asia was, and that the limitations on the extent to which poppy cultivation in Kandahar and Helmand particularly can be increased, while there's sort of economic analysis that shows that's justified, there's kind of a geographic imperative that creates limits there. And I just want your thoughts on that observation. Is that credible, or could they quadruple the crop within the existing geographic limitation without hesitation? And so they're nowhere near that geographic bound. And we'll go right across. Ms. McDonald, Ms. Feldman-Brown, Mr. Brown.
I mean, I think you're right. The poppy's a very metropolitan plant, but it does require certain minimal conditions. One of the things we've said in the poppy for medicine protocols that I mentioned briefly was to start using the J-star capacity, which is being used by the United States in Iraq, which is allowing that ground radar system to track. What we're trying to do in a counter-narcotics policy, and I think that's what you've heard today, is we're trying to make friends with the people we want to be friends with and really go after the people who are the troublemakers. And the local community in Afghanistan are the people we want to bring close to us, and the traffickers and the guys at the top, and I would reiterate, those who are involved in the provincial and federal governments are the ones that we want to focus on. So that's why we see this Poppy for Medicine as allowing us to divide those two.
Ms. Feldman-Brown.
There are actually very many limiting factors on the size of poppy cultivation. Actually, poppy is only cultivated on 3% of arable land, so there are vast opportunity to expand, and yet expansion doesn't take place, even though we have seen massive overproduction. One immediate limitation
is that true even in Kandahar and Helmand as opposed to, I mean, Nangarhar as much strikes me as a more hospitable landscape, and one in which there's more opportunity for a whole variety of crops, and therefore I'm not, so my question to you specifically is your 3% number true in
the 3% is countrywide.